You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja.
We love the herb.
It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Wednesday, November 29th, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. It's also officially 1 week away before I'll be sitting on 7 Mile Beach in beautiful Negril, Jamaica. Vacation is approaching, folks. I'll be gone starting on, this Friday will be my last show for a while because the vacation starts the following week. And runs through 2 weeks. So I will be back for the week before Christmas. And then Christmas week will be off. So there's only going to be 1 week worth of shows in December. My apologies for that, but I've got to have some vacation time. So in that last week of December, we're going to take a look at the biggest stories in marijuana in 2017. It'll be our best of 2017 lineup. It'll be new shows, but we're going to be looking at old news, so to speak, kind of like most news outlets do with their, retrospectives of 2017. So we'll get that for you coming up next week. But on today's show, we've got a retrospective looking back in our Cannabis Activism Now segment with Nishan Karrasik, who's a scientist working on the idea of cannabis strain naming. And he gave us an insight into how they're trying to standardize that. So that's coming up in the middle of the show. Also coming up on the show today, we'll have time for a radical rant where I discuss the point that it's really not about how harmful marijuana may be to society, to teenagers, to productivity, whatever. It's really a question of equal rights and equal treatment under the law. So we'll talk about that coming up in the Radical Rant. Also on the show today, we'll get to the cannabis headline news, and our lead story today has to do with the state of Indiana and a crackdown on cannabidiol substances, cannabidiol supplements. And in the What About the News segment, I'm going to take that on and go a little bit deeper into it and ask the critical question, why does any cop anywhere care about CBD? So we'll talk about that. Plus, coming up, we've got our anti-drug public service announcement of the day. We got a blast from the past from KISS frontman Paul Stanley telling you to just say no. That's all coming up on the Marijuana Agenda. But first, the news.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Wednesday, November 29th, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb is directing state excise police to resume checking stores for cannabidiol, or CBD, products after Attorney General Curtis Hill issued an opinion declaring them illegal in the Hoosier state. Stores will have 60 days to either sell or pull products from their shelves. In a statement, Holcomb said excise police will, quote, perform normal, periodic regulatory spot checks of CBD oil products, end quote. Those checks will focus on CBD products that contain any THC, the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, regardless of the amount. Most of the CBD products being sold in Indiana contain less than 0.3% THC, meaning they can't produce a high. Last week, Hill deemed CBD illegal in an official opinion, regardless of the amount of THC in the product. Hill said the only condition under which using CBD oil is legal in the state is if an epileptic patient is on the state CBD registry that lawmakers created earlier this year. However, it is unclear how those patients would obtain the oil, since it would be illegal to sell it in the state under Hill's interpretation. Incoming Democratic New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy is standing strong on his promise to legalize marijuana in the Garden State, despite pushback from the incoming State Assembly Speaker Craig Coughlin. Days after Murphy's election, Coughlin said he had to discuss the issue with fellow Assembly Democrats to, quote, make sure it makes sense, end quote. Coughlin said Tuesday that he would, quote, consider posting the marijuana bill if it's right and it makes sense, end quote. Murphy on Tuesday reaffirmed his commitment to legalizing marijuana, saying, quote, "There are concerns that people have that I accept and I understand, but it's clear as a bell to me what the right way going forward is, given the alternatives," end quote. State Senate President Stephen Sweeney, another Democrat, said that it's better for the legislature to legalize pot than to have the public vote on it, saying, quote, "It allows us flexibility," end quote. David Owen of Grand Forks delivered a proposed petition to initiate a ballot measure to legalize the recreational use of marijuana to the North Dakota Secretary of State's office yesterday. State officials must now draft a petition title and review the format before it can be circulated for signatures. Organizers hope to have a statutory measure on the November 2018 ballot. The petition calls for the full legalization of marijuana, meaning those over the age of 21 could use, possess, grow, and distribute it for any purpose, said Owen, chairman of the effort's sponsoring committee. It says anyone previously convicted of a crime that's legalized by the measure would have their records expunged. North Dakota voters approved marijuana for medicinal purposes last year, but a full legalization effort failed to gather enough signatures. Television travel guide Rick Steves has made a stop in Chicago to advocate for legalizing marijuana in Illinois. Steves is the host of the program Rick Steves Europe and a proponent of legalizing recreational pot. He spoke Tuesday at a hearing called by Illinois legislators to consider the issue. Steves says, quote, "Marijuana is here to stay," end quote. He says states can either build more prisons to lock up drug users or, quote, "figure out a better solution," end quote. Democratic State Senator Heather Stearns and State Representative Kelly Cassidy are the lead sponsors of a measure to tax and regulate adult-use cannabis. They say doing so could generate hundreds of millions in new revenue. Not everyone was sold on the idea. Republican State Senator Dan McConchie says legalization could lead to other problems. The Oregon Liquor Control Commission has released guidelines on how marijuana licensees may compete in cannabis cup competitions. The OLCC explains that, quote, "Only retailers can sell or give directly to the public. Producers, processors, wholesalers, and labs cannot sell or gift to non-licensees. The only compliant way for cup competition samples to be provided to judges is for the items to be purchased at an OLCC retailer location," end quote. Such an arrangement recalls the original High Times Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam, where judges engaged in a coffee shop crawl to purchase entries from competing Dutch marijuana retailers. The guidelines also state that, quote, "No consumption is allowed in a public place," and, quote, "Any location with an OLCC liquor license would be a public place even if the venue is specifically reserved for a cannabis event," end quote. However, they add, quote, "With prior approval, an OLC licensee can set up booth at an event and have limited amounts of marijuana items on site for display only," end quote. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Wednesday, November 29th, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. The Marijuana Agenda is a listener-supported independent podcast brought to you by Radical Russ Media, LLC. Subscribe to our VIP feed at mjagenda.com for access to our ad-free podcast segment archive. Make a one-time donation to support the Marijuana Agenda at paypal.me/radicalruss. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
People should say no to drug use.
It's really, really easy.
Adding more gasoline to the fire.
Lackadaisical. Really tough, really big, really great
To infect and rot our nation's bone.
Dangerous gateway drug.
We don't need to be legalizing marijuana.
to build and grow a stronger, healthier, and drug-free society.
Well, first thing in What in the News, I want to refer to the story that affects me here locally, and that is the Oregon Liquor Control Commission releasing guidelines on how marijuana licensees can compete in a cannabis cup. This was so frustrating to us because when marijuana wasn't legal, we had cannabis cups here all the time. It was very strange. In the Pacific Northwest, we had a Seattle Cannabis Cup that ran for a couple of years. They were looking at putting together a Portland Cannabis Cup. And once we legalized, the legislatures went nuts as far as the idea of cannabis venues, as far as pot lounges or anything of the sort. They specifically felonized them in Washington state. You run any sort of event, knowingly or not, that it allows cannabis consumption, and you get a felony. Class C, I think. And so that pretty much put the kibosh on any cannabis cups because there's an event that's allowing consumption. In Oregon, it's a little trickier because with Oregon, they set it up so that our Clean Air Act got amended. They put in cannabis smoke and vapor. They just shoehorned it in. They just inserted it into text so that the Clean Air Act affects any sort of burned tobacco, burned cannabis, vaporized tobacco, vaporized cannabis, right? And what's frustrating about that is that the Clean Air Act has a preface to it, has an introductory that discusses, its reasoning, why we're coming up with the Clean Air Act. And this was, back in the 90s when everybody was freaking out about secondhand smoke. The Clean Air Act specifically stated that we're putting this act together because secondhand smoke has been proven to be dangerous and people who aren't smokers are being harmed by it. And that was acceptable to most people because, all right, you got some science that shows secondhand smoke's bad. We'll just smoke outside from now on. But to shoehorn in cannabis smoke and cannabis vapor doesn't fit with the initial premise of the Clean Air Act, which was to protect people from harmful secondhand smoke. There's no science showing that cannabis smoke secondhand is harmful. And there's certainly no science to show that secondhand cannabis vapor is harmful. And then, so basically that sets it up so that you can't have a cannabis cup anywhere that would be indoors. In any indoor venue, can't have a cannabis cup that's a public venue because it's, Clean Air Act. Can't have the smoke going on. You could have it indoors at a private location, but then the rules about private locations get into you can't have any paid people. They have to be volunteers. And if this location has an OLCC alcohol license, even if you're not using it, that's a public place and you can't have any consumption. So any hall, any theater, any expo center that you might want to rent out for a cannabis cup, you can't because those places all have liquor licenses. Even though they might not open the beer stand, doesn't matter. If they have the license, it's a public place. So what's the only alternative is, well, you could have a cannabis cup outside, I suppose, but then outside you're subject to being in a public place or being where cannabis consumption can be seen openly, which is also forbidden. So if you wanted to have a cannabis cup in Oregon, pretty much you were limited to finding some farmer with a massive amount of land where you could bring people into, and at the place they're in, it wouldn't be visible from the public. Then maybe you could have a cannabis cup. So finally, it seems OLCC has recognized the silliness of that. And they've explained that the pot shops, just the retailers, not the processors, the wholesalers, not the growers, right? Just the pot shops can sell and give to the public. So if there were a cannabis cup, Bobby the grower couldn't enter the cannabis cup. But Bobby the grower, who then sells his product to Joe's dispensary, Joe's pot shop, could enter it. Joe's pot shop could enter Bobby's nugs, but Bobby couldn't enter them directly. And Joe's pot shop couldn't take them to the judge or whatever. The judge would have to come in and get it. So it's like the old High Times cannabis cups where you had to go from coffee shop to coffee shop. And they've also explained that any licensee can set up a booth in an event. And that could be a processor, a wholesaler, a lab, a retailer, producer, a grower, right? But cannabis items could only be display only. You could show off your plants, Show off your bud, show off your shatter, your edibles, but nobody could consume them. So we're making some progress here in the state of Oregon. It'd be nice to see if the Cannabis Cup will return here. But the big story I wanted to talk about in this What in the News segment is the state of Indiana. The governor there now reinstating this crackdown on CBD oil. Now, Indiana is a state that's got a CBD oil law, and the attorney general has asserted that an epileptic person on the CBD registry would be legal to possess and use the oil. But this guy, the attorney general, has said you can't sell it, can't import it, you can't manufacture it. It's completely illegal. And the governor now, based on that opinion, is telling the excise police to go crack down on this, get all the CBD oil off the shelves in the next 60 days. And a lot of this CBD oil has trace amounts of THC, less than 0.3%. And the governor has said that regardless, if it has any THC in it, we want it off the shelves of these CBD products. So where I find this a little strange is that there are hemp products on the shelves in Indiana with trace amounts of THC in them. There's hemp soaps, there's hemp lotions. They got trace amounts of THC in them. Some of them might have a greater concentration of THC in them than some of these CBD oils. So the governor's saying, any amount of THC, it makes it sound like he's really going after the THC that just happens to be in the CBD. But since CBD is illegal, that gives him the ability to go after it rather than, going after the hemp soaps. But folks, that trace amount of THC, whether it's in CBD or in a hemp seed burger or whatever, is still such a negligible amount of THC, it's not going to have any sort of significant psychoactive effect on anyone. So why do they care? Who gives a shit if people have CBD oil? Are they worried that Hoosiers are getting the oil and concentrating it down, buying, gallons of it and distilling it to get the THC out of it to get high? It's just so amazing to me how much fear is involved in this. How much it is that the governor of Indiana, the attorney general of Indiana, and these people that hate pot, it's just a fear factor for them. Oh my God, CBD comes from marijuana. Marijuana's bad. We better bust people. What harm has befallen the people of the state of Indiana since all this CBD oil has been bought and sold? Now, I could elucidate some harms, like, these CBD products aren't consistently labeled. Patients that are buying them might be expecting a greater dose of CBD than what they're really getting. The CBD products are really expensive compared to what they should be. Prices are really high. Those aren't the kind of harms you call a statewide police excise crackdown on. It's not like we've got people rushing into the emergency room. Oh, doc, you got to help me, man. I took way too much of that CBD oil. Nobody's wrecking their cars. Nobody's puking on the sidewalks, overdosing in the alleys and dying. In fact, probably lots of people in Indiana are getting some benefit from this. I'll bet a lot of them are dealing with their inflammation, their pain, other conditions that CBD might address. If it doesn't get anyone high, why do they care? And it's not as if this illegal sales of CBD is undercutting some legal market in CBD. You can't even make the regulatory argument like, well, we got to go after these guys because they're not following the law exactly. And the people that follow the law exactly are at a disadvantage. Can't even make that argument. There is no people following the law exactly because there is no, as you've just said, Governor, there's no law that allows the distribution of CBD. Now, of course, you could always say, well, it's illegal, so therefore, boom, that's all the reason you need. But prosecutors, governments, attorneys general, they have prosecutorial discretion. And already we heard Bush's attorney general, Roberto Gonzalez, say that, look, going after medical marijuana, and that's medical with THC, going after medical marijuana with THC, not a big priority. Waste of resources to go after that. So what kind of use of Indiana's taxpayers' resources is going into these shops, shutting them down, pulling the CBD oil off the shelves, and doing demonstrable harm to the people of Indiana who are using those medicines, using that CBD to live a better life. Nobody wins in this scenario, Governor.
There are white folks, and then there are ignorant motherfuckers like you.
Every time an Obama clip comes in, I miss him so much. Remember when a terrible presidential scandal was putting your feet up on the desk? Wearing a tan coat? Oh, man. I don't even want to look at the news to see what the latest thing Trump's done today. I can't smoke enough to deal with it. We'll be back talking about strain names right after this. If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
We need to say, as Nancy Reagan said, just say no. Don't do it. There's no excuse for this.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
The International Cannabis Business Conference is headed to Hawaii. Get your tickets now for the year's best cannabis industry island retreat this December 1st through 3rd. Kauai Grand Hyatt hosts the 3-day ICBC, which begins with a VIP reception featuring cannabis comedian Doug Benson. The ICBC features exhibitor booths, keynote speeches, and informative panels with industry experts and regulatory officials. Then, when it's all said and done, kick back for the incredible after party with music by reggae legends Morgan Heritage. There's also a singles golf tournament you can play on Monday, sponsored by Leafly Endured Ventures. Log on to internationalcbc.com to get more information and buy your tickets now. Special discount hotel rates are in effect, so act fast. That's internationalcbc.com for the International Cannabis Business Conference. Aloha.
Now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
I don't even have a real job. Yeah, I've heard some people say drugs are cool, but they are wrong. Some of them are dead wrong.
This has been an actual anti-drug public service announcement. To combat this and other drug war hysteria, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific at live.mjagenda.com or download the free podcast at mjagenda.com. The Marijuana Agenda free podcast is available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, SoundCloud, and on our Facebook page at MJ Agenda. Free video archives are available at the Radical Russ channel on YouTube. Help keep this media free by making a donation at paypal.me/radicalruss. The Marijuana Agenda. Kevin Sabet's boogeyman since 2012.
You have offended my family, and you have offended Shaolin Temple.
Yes, might have gotten away with it, too. If it wasn't for these blasted kids and their dogs.
Hey everybody, it's Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
Activism begins with ACT. The Marijuana Agenda features the stories of hardworking grassroots activists fighting to reform our cannabis laws in this edition of Cannabis Activism Now.
Good day and welcome to Activist Agenda. I'm Russ Belville. For Activist Agenda today, we take you back to the Portland Hemp Fest Expo to listen to some highlights of a presentation delivered by Nishan Karrasik, the Chief Strategy Officer of Phylos Bioscience, based in Portland, Oregon. Nishan delivered a presentation on cannabis science and naming. We take you to that presentation now.
My name is Nishan Karrasik. I'm a co-founder of Phylos Bioscience, and we're a genomic sequencing company. We specialize on cannabis. And so we started the company realizing that we needed to bring science to the industry. It seemed to be lacking. So we realized that this is what the industry looked like at that point. This is about 2014. There's general labels and cannabis in it. Maybe it makes sense that it really is that. Maybe it doesn't. We were inspired by this article in the New York Times. The guy in it went to a dispensary, bought something he really liked, and then he went back. I think he first went to another dispensary and tried to buy that same variety and didn't find the same thing that he bought before. So he goes back to the original dispensary trying to buy the same thing, and again doesn't buy that variety because all that people are really selling is a name. So the co-founder of mine is Mowgli Holmes, who's a geneticist. And one of his professors, Rob DeSalle, he called up, who is really a cool guy, and he figured that maybe he might be interested in a project like this. He called him up, and Rob DeSalle from the American Museum of Natural History gave us a little bit of money to do our first sequencing. And so we collected a bunch of samples. In that initial phase of collection, we collected samples from all over the world from many different collectors. I think a couple of months ago, we had samples from 80 different countries. By now, it's more than that. The idea was to look at, as you look at sequencing projects, you want to try to find out a couple of different things, and there's some very cool questions that can be asked. But what is the origin? How did it travel? We've been carrying this plant around with us for 10,000 years, and there's been many trading routes, many ship and land and whatnot. So can we see some of that population changing over time? As it goes through Africa to South America and up, or what is cannabis americana? Some of these questions we're really looking to ask. And those questions are possible to be answered, but they're a little harder to answer because some of these things they don't have very good records. So Herboria do have good records where they've locked in a date, and we're now just collecting some of those samples. We're right now negotiating with China for a sample that's 2500 BC. This is on the bottom right there. There's about a 2-pound basket full of cannabis, and based on the chemical testing in that right now, it looks like that's a breakdown of actually pretty decent THC. And this is a grave from a shaman in China. And some of the other samples we have are from the 1930s. There's a collection that went out during Prohibition. So someone went out and shut all those shops down. And a lot of these samples show similar outcome data that we are expecting from today. PTSD, pain, sleep, aphrodisia, So our lab right now is, our actual laboratory is probably twice this size. We just had to hire a bunch more people and buy more equipment and whatnot. So a little bit about DNA. I'm sure you guys all know about DNA. It's in every cell. It's in a chromosome, and those sequences are instructions for the plant to do specific tasks. So it's in every organism, and it's a source code. But it can tell us a couple of different kinds of pieces of information. The traits, how much CBD, how internodal length, the yield sizes, all of those kinds of things. It can tell us about the ancestry, so your heritage, Where did you come from? And it also talks about us as individuals and can identify us as individuals. So we decided to come up with a bunch of different products for the company. And one of them is tools for breeders, which in fact actually takes the longest to develop because you need to do a lot of plant sequencing. But the first one we focused on was a plant sex test, and that basically just tells the sex of a plant within 7 days, and you don't even have to move it out of the prop trays. You can basically take it from the cotyledon leaf. It's the only legal sex test right now because the cotyledon leaf has no trichome production. So trichomes, any amount of THC is illegal to cross state lines. We also have a genotype test, which is an identity test. Sorry about that. So we have a... Okay.
So I'm terribly sorry to interrupt your flow because this is an awesome presentation. I just need to give everybody a little bit of update. If they're looking at the schedule today as being extremely strict, it may not have been quite as strict as I intended. Ed will be starting here in a little while after Nishan's presentation for Phylos is done. And for people that were interested in the other scheduled presentation at 2 o'clock, we're going to be starting that up in the AV room, which is out front and immediately to the left. It's room 101. And that'll be with Megan Schwarting and Trista Okel. And now I return you to your regularly scheduled content.
So this is the plant sex test. I'm going to go through this really quickly. And they're a kit, and you buy it. You smash a cotyledon leaf on a piece of paper. You send it in, and 48 hours after we receive it, you get your results back that says it's a male and a female. A lot of times people ask us, they don't believe that we can do that. What we look for is a Y chromosome and a reference cannabis sequence. And so we just measure, as you can see, maybe not so well, but on this little amplification plot, we look for the Y chromosome and we look for the cannabis reference. If it has the Y chromosome and the cannabis reference, we can call it a male. If it just has the cannabis reference, it's a female. We do not call hermaphrodites because they're oftentimes environmentally determined. At this point, we don't know what the actual marker is. It's a variable that is oftentimes grower or environment induced. Our largest set of we've done up to 18,000 sex tests at one time, all the way down to 4 is on one card. Our identity test is, we looked at it, and our actual name is Phylos, which is based on a phylogenetic tree. And we sequenced our first run and our first collection, and we did it as a phylogenetic tree, thinking that was Rob DeSalle, his expertise is in phylogenetic trees, and we went that route. And this is what an evolutionary tree looks like, mom, dad, children, crossing, all of that. And we think of it in the way that we think about humans, our mom and our dad, our children. Those children have, wives, husbands, then have children from that. But in cannabis and plants, it gets a lot more complicated because we do inbreeding and we do back crossing and up crossing. And so when you look at this, it gets really ugly really, really quick. And so pretty quickly we realized that evolutionary tree wouldn't work for looking at how things are related in cannabis. So then we looked at network relationships. And this is from wine. And sort of how these plants are crossed and related. But again, there's no spatial information here. And there's these nice lines that say this came from this, that came from that. And so we looked at that. We also looked at some of these relationship networks to see how, and this is a stated one from Seed Finder, I think. But all this information is just stated information. So I took a X plant and crossed it with a Y plant, and I got a Z plant. And the only thing that I really know is Z plant because I named it. Most of the time, we don't know what we actually have. In fact, when we've sequenced varieties of whole farms, we find a significant amount of replications. People have the same plant named different things, or they just don't have what they think they have. So we also then looked at relationship clustering to see if that would work, and this sort of puts them in a scatter plot. And that looks pretty interesting in terms of genetic information. We also then looked at like a 23andMe to look at heritage and see how much of your heritage is made up from different clusters of known sequences. And what we came up with, and if you're not familiar with it, we have a three-dimensional relationship map that has sequenced, and it's available to everybody to go on the web and look at this. It's galaxy.phylosbioscience.com, or you can just search Phylos Galaxy. And basically, we put samples that are similar or the same thing really close together, and those that are less similar, more further apart. And the lines indicate a primary relationship, so a sibling or a parent-child relationship. And that sample that just went across was called GAL, 305 or something. And that really says that we have multiple samples as one plant, and they're all different names. So we can't be the experts to know what name it actually is. It's all up to you guys. This is an open source project, and that we want everybody to participate. And so if you look in, AC/DC cluster, that's pretty well known. There's a few people that call it sour tsunami or something else, but most people really think that that's AC/DC and Harlequin. And OG Kush is a different example where there's Larry's OG Kush, XXX, Miyagi, all kinds of names from the same cut and the same plant. And I think that that's because it's underground and people are trying to brand that phenotype, their way of growing. So a phenotype is an effect of the environment on a genotype, and a genotype is a plant. And so the naming problem is a bit of a challenge.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is brought to you by Cannabis Kamikaze, a professional licensed producer from Canada producing 3 pounds per light. Follow Cannabis Kamikaze on Twitter at Cannabis Kamikaze. That's at Cannabis, Kamikaze. Cannabis Kamikaze.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Today in the United States, 1 in 5 Americans live where adult access to cannabis is legal. Another 2 in 5 Americans live in medical marijuana states. But the government still claims there's no accepted medical use for cannabis in the United States, even after 20 years of medical marijuana in California. And they say we're the ones who can't think straight.
Health Cannabinoid, your ACMPR experts. Consultation services for medical cannabis. Visit healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. That's www.healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. Health Cannabinoid.
total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am here. That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to leave mistakes.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
Radical rant.
Well, I had a rant all planned for this segment until this last segment was on and I got to snooping through my news feed and I saw something that was so unbelievable. I had to double check to make sure it wasn't The Onion, make sure it wasn't some satire site. But here goes, folks. Attorney General Jeff Sessions today announced a new so-called opioid czar to combat the opioid overdose epidemic. Now, this is different than the commission. Okay, you had the presidential commission with Chris Christie and Marty Walsh and Bertha Madras and Patrick Kennedy and a bunch of prohibitionists, right? That was bad enough, right? But they've already made their recommendations. They've already issued their report. So now it's time to get some work done. Now it's time to dig in and start dealing with the opioid crisis. So Attorney General Sling Blade Hobbit announced today that they've named an opioid czar, a person who will oversee the White House's efforts to combat the opioid overdose epidemic. Now, did they go and choose an esteemed scientist? You know, someone who's been working on addiction, someone who's got a medical background, psychological background perhaps, maybe someone from Drug Policy Alliance been working on this issue for a long time? Nope, didn't do that. Maybe an activist, a researcher, someone who's spent a long time researching this problem, like say a Maya Salovitz or Amanda Ryman or someone who's really in touch with the whole opioid crisis and all the angles. No. You might think maybe someone from law enforcement, right? I mean, that wouldn't be the perfect choice for opioids, but since, you know, there is some illegal drug use involved in that, maybe a law enforcement person, a former ONDCP person, a former DEA cop, hell, any kind of cop. The opioid czar is a cop? Nope. How about a public policy wonk that maybe the person who's going to lead the White House's efforts on fighting opioids could be a policy person and maybe a prohibitionist, maybe someone like a Kevin Sabet, right? To lead the opioid crisis. I mean, I wouldn't like that, but is that who got established as the opioid czar? No, none of those. Not a scientist, not a researcher, not an expert, not an activist, not a policy wonk, not even a prohibitionist. The person that Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that Donald Trump has said will be the next White House opioid crisis counselor is Kellyanne Conway. I'm serious. Kellyanne Conway. You know her, the blonde who shows up on the TV shows lying every time she moves her lips. The one who plays whataboutism with every subject. Yes, that Kellyanne Conway, who to my knowledge has absolutely zero in the way of bona fides and experience and education necessary to tackle the nation's opioid crisis. More than 64,000 people died last year from opioid overdoses. And what's Kellyanne Conway's justification? What's the justification for having her in this position? Well, in the BuzzFeed story, Sessions says Trump has asked her to, quote, coordinate and lead the effort from the White House, end quote. And one opioid policy expert named Andrew Kolodny said, it's a positive sign. She's a high-profile figure in the administration, showing the administration takes this seriously. No, the administration does not take this seriously because, once again, they're treating it as a political issue. They're treating it as a war that can be fought and then they're going to bring in some high-profile spinmeister to spin the war. That's what's going on here. If they took this seriously, they'd call on real public policy experts, real addiction experts, real medical experts, real scientific experts. You're putting Kellyanne Conway in charge of the opioid overdose crisis. We might as well just sign up another 64,000 deaths for next year. She's not going to accomplish anything but muddying the waters, spinning the results. And folks, my fear about this is that the appointment of Kellyanne Conway to this role is a signal that this is going to be a war on drugs. We're going to go back to, strong arm police type tactics rather than understanding how addiction really works and providing some compassion and some help to these people. And so if you're going to commit to another one of these public policy wars, these culture wars, you got to have a culture warrior in charge of it. That's what this is about. Trump's going to seize on this opioid crisis as part of the culture war, and they're going to pivot. They're going to play what about me-ism. They're going to pivot that to cover all drugs. They're going to pivot that to cover marijuana, to cover cocaine, meth, whatever. And then that pivots into immigration and the border wall. Oh, all this heroin's coming across the border. All this meth's coming across the border. We got to build a wall. This is 100% a political decision by the Trump administration. Of course, every decision by the Trump administration is a 100% political calculation. Only calculation going on is, how does this rile up the base? How does this help Donald Trump get reelected? And Trump knows he's under attack from every angle. And the only thing that can get his head above water in the public poll standings is a successful war, whether that's a culture war or an actual shooting war. And with the way he's been saber rattling with North Korea, we might get that too. So there's your breaking news. Kellyanne Conway is now the White House Opioid Czar. You can imagine this is going to turn out spectacularly. All right, folks, that's all the time we've got for today. Thanks for joining us for another show. We've got 2 more shows for this week. And then, like I said, off on vacation until December 18th. Be gone in beautiful Jamaica. Oh, and Dallas and Las Vegas, too. We'll see you there.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
For everyone here at Delta 9 House of Studios, I'm Radical Russ Belville. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
You grow it, you try it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you try it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.